Dr. Glowacki is a cross-disciplinary researcher currently based in Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain. He is the founder of a research group called the Intangible Realities Laboratory, IRL, and presently works at the CITES Intelligent Technologies Research Center. He is the recipient of several research awards, including a Royal Society Research Fellowship in ERC grant. His immersive digital artworks have been experienced by more than 200,000 people on 3 continents. He's going to talk today about dissolving egoic identity to sense of connection. Multi-person VR can elicit peak experiences comparable to psychedelics. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. So thanks everybody who made it here 9:30 on Saturday. Mornings aren't my best time either, so thank you. So yeah, I'm gonna talk today about a little bit of work that we've done to, which kind of provides a proof of principle that some of the immersive virtual reality work in our lab is able to reproduce many of the same effects as the psychedelic literature has demonstrated. So I'll describe that today. But so first, just by way of introduction, the lab I run that I founded, we call it the Intangible Realities Laboratory. We call it the IRL for short. So this is an image a couple years, this was about 2.5 years ago. So this is Chris Timmerman and Robert Carhart Harris came to visit. And what I showed them when they came to visit was actually, what I showed them was a virtual reality demonstration of the crystal structure of LSD bound to the human HT2B serotonin receptor. And so everything we do in VR uniquely is multi-person. And so what you're seeing in this video is you're actually seeing the perspective of Chris as he walks into the cell membrane and he's inspecting the LSD molecule, which is bound in the binding pocket of the HT2B serotonin receptor. So here you see, this is Robin's head here. And so here you see Robin staring intently at the LSD molecule, which is bound in the active site there. So, yeah, that gives you some idea of what we do. But so in this talk, I'm going to talk about extending these immersive environments that we've used for scientific simulation and visualization and extending them to developing immersive experiences which elicit effects which appear to be really similar to the effects that are demonstrated in the psychedelic research literature. And so I really like this slide. So this map is a population-weighted map. So the size of every country is weighted by the size of the number of people in the country or the area. So you see India is disproportionately much larger than it actually is because it's a population-weighted map. And, you know, there's a lot of hype about psychedelics, you know, curing mental health in a lot of places around the world. But the reality is that, like, even if there's full regulatory approval, there's a lot of cultures where it's just not going to happen, right? So if you've traveled to places like Japan or China and places like this, there's a cultural context where it probably won't work in exactly the same way as it works in the West. And so this map just effectively shows a representation of where psychedelic psychotherapies are likely to take hold in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, where they'll be likely, and where they will be, unlikely to be regulated anytime soon. And so what you see is a huge portion of the world's population is, well, the majority of the world's population is missing from this plot. And so, there's a lot of other complexities associated with psychedelic psychotherapy. So Rick Doblin yesterday mentioned that, a number of $30,000 per patient for MDMA therapy. That's expensive. Then there's questions about scalability, given that cost is complicated. And then there's other issues around, as we all know, there's other issues just around safety of psychedelics. So in general, we know that psychedelics are safe, but they require a lot of support in order to ensure that there's no problems. And so I just want to frame what I'm about to describe with this really interesting paper that Roland Griffiths and co. published a couple of years ago, where they analyzed about 2,000 accounts of people that had spiritual, what they call God encounter experiences, induced by psychedelics, and then also through, standard sort of religious experiences. And, remarkably, what Roland reported in the paper was he highlighted the similarity between these mystical experiences that happen for people with and without the drugs. And so, specifically, the abstract says, although there were some differences between non-drug and the combined psychedelic group, as well as between the 4 psychedelic groups, the similarities among these groups were striking. And in both groups, these experiences were rated as among the most personally meaningful and spiritually significant lifetime experiences, with moderate to strong, persistent, positive changes in life satisfaction, purpose, and meaning attributed to these experiences. And so what I like about this paper is it just highlights the fact that maybe a lot of people know this, but there's other ways to get to these self-transcendent states, right? Psychedelic drugs are not the only way there. And experiences that arise in different ways have similarly positive effects, even in the longer term, when analyzed en masse. And so, given the complications with psychedelic rollout in different cultures across the world, given that we know we can get to these self-transcendent states in different ways, the question we really set out to ask over the past few years with our virtual reality work, our computer science work, is we know that virtual reality offers the possibility for extremely immersive sensory experiences. So can it be used to elicit mystical type experiences of the sort reported by Griffiths and co.? And so the answer is yes. So I'll spoil it. Yes, the answer is yes, and I'll show you the data, and it's exciting. But there's a really important design question, right? When you set out to do this, right? So when you design a virtual reality environment or any immersive technology environment, you have to design it, right? Whereas when I give somebody a psychedelic molecule, I have to design the set and setting, but I have very little control over the design of the actual experience, right? And so there is a question of like, okay, well, how do I design that experience to elicit a mystical type effect? And this is a really crucial aspect of being able to do this. And so what we did was we started looking at the phenomenology of transcendent experiences, both drug-induced and non-drug-induced. And so I just have a few examples of some of the quotes that inspired us as we set out on this design task. So this is from a Griffiths 2008 study by a psilocybin study participant. Probably some of you might be able to relate to this feeling. The participant says, I experienced a feeling of no boundaries, where I didn't know where I ended and my surroundings began. Somehow I was able to comprehend what oneness is, right? So there's this deep sense of unity beyond the boundaries of the body. Another quotation from the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, right? This is sometimes called the overview effect. He says, when he was seeing the Earth from space, suddenly I realized that the molecules of my body, the spacecraft, and the body of my partners were all manufactured in some ancient generation of stars. I felt an overwhelming sense of oneness or connectedness. And so again, this deep sort of profound sense of unity, even that goes down to this sort of molecular sensitivity, right? So he's saying even at the molecular level, he could comprehend this unity that transcended the boundaries of his body. This is from the account by Alan Watts during his time in Japan by a Zen master who says during a meditation session he has, I lost the boundary of my physical body. I felt I was standing in the center of the cosmos. I saw people coming towards me, but all were myself. And so again, this sense of transcendence beyond the boundaries of the body. And then finally, this is a really great quote from Jill Bolt Taylor, who's a brain scientist who did a really fantastic TED Talk when she had a left brain stroke. And she says, I could no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and molecules of my arm blend with the atoms and molecules of the wall, and all I could detect was this energy. I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me. And because I could no longer identify the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all the energy that was, and it was beautiful. And so again, in common with the last three quotes, you see this sense of transcendence beyond the limits of the body, this sensitivity of the molecular reality on a deep level that sort of defines the sort of the continuity between us and our environment, right? So from that level of perception, the molecular flux that characterizes our body with relation to environment, it's much more continuous than when we think about just the sort of traditional boundary between our physical body and the material world. And energy is a crucial thing that emerges. And so I just think it's really interesting to ground these phenomenological accounts in modern physics, right? So, a lot of modern physics tells us that, matter is energy. Right? So Einstein has a very famous equation that directly relates matter to energy. David Bohm famously said that all of matter is frozen light. Erwin Schrödinger had this equation called the Schrödinger equation, H psi equals E psi, which this is the fundamental equation of quantum mechanics, but basically says that everything you think of as solid is actually some blurry wave-like weird thing, okay? And so I think it's interesting to kind of think about the phenomenological accounts of people perceiving themselves as energy that transcends their body, and then looking at that from a lens of modern physics and saying, well actually, like philosophically, from a physics perspective, there's some basis for that perceptual framework. And so that was the perceptual framework that we chose to design VR experiences to elicit effects comparable to psychedelics, right? The nice thing about the matter-energy paradigm in physics is there's equations you can use in physical modeling, right? So my background is really in computational quantum mechanics. The nice thing is if you use this physics paradigm, there's actually equations you can put in software to model this stuff, right? And so that's really useful when you're designing a VR experience. We can just use all the physics equations to do this stuff. And so what we did is we designed, okay, so that's not really working so well, that video. That's a GIF, but what we designed is a multi-person VR experience called Isness, which what it does is it literally transforms your material body into a luminous, energetic essence. And you can't see it on this GIF because this computer's screwing with my graphics, but I'll show you another video. And we call it Isness, inspired by the Huxley quote from The Doors of Perception, where he recounts, he says, I was seeing the miracle moment by moment of naked existence, flowers shining with their own inner light and all but quivering under the pressure of the significance with which they were charged. Even the folds of my gray flannel trousers were charged with isness, right? And so he's talking about this perception of the sort of energetic luminosity that he was sensitive to whilst he was taking mescaline. So we called it Isness in a nod to Huxley. But this is our multi-person, this is a schematic of our multi-person VR lab. So accommodates 4 people. We build our own supercomputers and we hook everything up ourselves. And this is how it looks. And so the Isness setup was something like this. There's 4 people in the room, all connected via VR headsets. There's 4 VR computers, and then there's 1 server, right? So that's what enables everybody in the world to see everybody else in the world, right? So this isn't solo VR. This is like VR where I'm energy field, and if you're there, you're energy field, and I can see you. It's not a solo experience, and that's really distinguishes it from a lot of VR. Here's a video of what it looks like in the world. This is just a very early video. It gives you a sense a little bit for 1 minute of what it looks like in this world. So here you have all the bodies are fully dissolved into energetic essences now. So that's just a small glimpse of what it looks like. It's about a 45-minute experience that goes through a whole sequence of aesthetic states. That's like a 1-minute clip from a few years ago. It actually looks quite different now. But here's a group of people in a session we led. And what's really unique about this is like you don't really see VR pictures like this very often, right? They're clearly embodied, they're clearly aware of each other, and they're holding hands, right? And so this gives you a glimpse into how this experience works. So this experience, when there's 4 people in the same room, we call it Isness co-located. So we abbreviate that Isness C. But during the pandemic, we developed it to run on cloud computers, and we call that Isness distributed, because now the people don't need to be in the same room anymore. They can be distributed anywhere across the globe. And so this image just shows 5 people logging in around the world. So the way that Isness works is it's a 4-person experience guided by 1 facilitator. So there's 5 people, 1 person is a guide or a facilitator, and then here's the 4 participants. And then here's their representation in the virtual world. And so we ran a bunch of experiments over COVID where we developed a network of Isness nodes across the world. So we have a number in California, Boston, Tennessee, Vienna, UK. Now we have a number of nodes in Spain and Frankfurt. And here's images of 4 people at 4 different nodes scattered across the world doing the Isness experience. And so one of the really remarkable things that we discovered when we did this Isness distributed is we discovered a new class of phenomenological experience that's not available to you in any context in real life or in psychedelics. And we call it energetic coalescence. And so there's this weird phenomenon where when I'm in VR, represented as an energy field with other people from around the world, I can literally include other people within my self-representation. And so what I've showed in this slide is on the left-hand side, I've shown 5 people logged in, and I've shown, like, broadly speaking, the boundaries of their bodies. So there's 5 people, right? And what you see is everybody's kneeling at the edge of their mat at the start. And so you see 5 distinct, you can't see my mouse here, but what you see is you see 5 distinct fields, right? And on the right-hand side, you see that everybody's standing up and they've moved closer in on their mat, and now all their fields have merged into one. And so literally when you're in Isness distributed, you look down and you see a luminous representation of all the other people in the space coalesce inside of your field, right? And so it literally is a form of including others in your self-representation in this distributed environment. And it seems to have really, really powerful effects on people's notion of the boundaries of themselves, right? How they think about the boundaries of themselves and the boundaries of the world around them. And I'll illustrate that in the results that I'm going to show. So we've now run 2 separate studies over the last 2 years on the results, and I'm briefly just going to show these. And in doing the results analysis, I'd just like to acknowledge some of the cool work done by the Altered States database by Timo, who's going to do the talk after me, which allowed a lot of this data comparison to happen. So the first thing we did was, so what we decided to do is we just administered Isness, and then we just used 4 different scales that are used by the psychedelic researchers over the last several years. So the first data set we compared to was the MEQ30. And so the MEQ30 has been applied to almost 2,000 different people over the last 10 years in about 28 different experiments. And so with the help of the Altered States database, I just took all the MEQ30 data over the last 10 years and I plotted it on one graph. And what you broadly, so the MEQ30 is 30 questions that collapses into 4 factors, right? I, M, P, T, ineffable, mystical, positive emotions, transcendence. And what you see if you take all the MEQ30 data and put it on this plot is you see that the scores in each factor roughly correlate with the strength of the psychedelic dose. And so these blue bands here are all the placebo doses. You see they're at the bottom. And then you have sort of very low doses in this beige band here. The green shows sort of moderate doses, and then the red shows very high doses, right? And you see a pretty good correlation for the MEQ30 here. So if we then take just the Isness results that we got, they're in this gray band here. And everything in green is statistically indistinguishable from the 2 studies we published with Isness, right? And so this was like the first set of results that we got. And we were pretty amazed by this, right? Because this was like one 45-minute VR session. And then we just administered this after people came out of VR. And we were getting results on MEQ that were, comparable to, 18, 20 milligrams of psilocybin or something like that. And reproducible, largely reproducible. Like it was reproducible. We've done it lots of times now. We actually have a third study in process, and the results are still robust. And then we looked at another scale. So there's a scale called the inclusion of self and community scale that psychologists often administer to look at the relation of an individual to a group. And it consists of a series of circles where you tell participants, okay, like one of the circles is you, say this orange circle is you, and the blue circle is the other participants. And you see I have 5 choices. Like one option is I feel very separate from the group, and then the other option on the other side is I feel totally coalesced with the group. And you just ask people, how do you feel in relation to the group? And you ask them before the experience and after the experience. And so the data we got, before is in the gray bars here, and then after is in the sort of hashed bars. But the value before was 1.2 plus or minus 1.5. Post-experience, it moved to 2.9 plus or minus 1.4. So a pretty statistically significant shift in people's sense of connection to the group, which in most cases was complete strangers. And then if we compare that to a recent Proceedings of the National Academy of Science paper by Molly Crockett's group at Yale, where they analyzed almost 450 people using psychedelics in naturalistic settings at festivals, where they used the exact same questionnaire, they found values of 2.8 plus or minus 1.3. And right, so like we're statistically indistinguishable from that. We're actually a little higher, but statistically it's indistinguishable. And again, that's from one Isness session that lasts about 45 to 60 minutes. If we look at another scale called the ego dissolution inventory, we find some interesting things. So the ego dissolution inventory basically measures your sense of how strong or weak your ego is. And if we do that, we find, I won't go through all the data here. It's all here. I won't go through that because I know we got started a little bit late. But what we find is that Isness, broadly speaking, if you look at the previous literature, is comparable to roughly 18 milligrams of psilocybin, roughly comparable to about 125 milligrams of MDMA, and about 80 to 100 micrograms of LSD. That's the results we get for the ego dissolution inventory. And then finally, if we look at the Communitas scale, which is some really nice work that's recently come out of Imperial, and one of the authors is sitting in the audience here. What we did was we just administered the Communitas scale that's been published recently in this paper here to people who went through Isness. And it's really a questionnaire that's just asking people about the extent to which they experience this intense feeling of togetherness in this experience. What we find is that the total Communitas that we got was like 44.1 plus or minus 6. And if you look at the Communitas data across hundreds of people who participated in psychedelic ceremonies, the results they got were 39.6 plus or minus 11.2. And so again, we're statistically indistinguishable from those results. And so if you kind of drill down a little bit more into the qualitative feedback, you kind of understand why we're getting these results, right? It's very clear that if we just look at some of these quotations of what people said, people say you can have this quite intense intimacy in space, but you're also totally safe. You can be with strangers and be really close, but also know where your boundaries are. I'm pretty bewildered. It's very immersive. You lose yourself in the connection to other people. I found the anonymity quite powerful because we were all completely equal in the space. Any of the prejudgments that come in from how people look, sound, that sort of thing just aren't there. I felt when coalescing the sweetest tenderness or pure childlike love, stripped back without any of the assumed layerings that we place upon reality and relationships, just to the absolute core. It was truly beautiful. So that gives you a kind of sense of some of the rationale for the results that we're seeing. So anyway, I'm just going to close here. We've published a preprint on the latest stuff here that you can look at if you're interested and read in more detail. And moving forward, I guess I just want to say, the cost of the implementation of this is significantly less than what we've heard about in psychedelic psychotherapy. So I think it's interesting to try and understand, where these results come from. And moving forward, there's a lot of questions, right? So we'd like to understand in more detail the mechanism behind these results. We'd like to look at longer-term follow-ups, right? We've just looked at the peak experience and done comparison with psychedelic peak experiences, but what we'd like to look at is longer-term follow-up. We'd also really like to look at how Isness brain scans and brain data compared to psychedelic brain data. We're really interested to see what we might observe there. And I'm working with Robin to start doing some controlled studies where I actually investigate Isness plus placebo versus Isness plus psychedelics. And we're going to be doing that as a massively distributed crowdsourced experiment. So if anybody's interested in helping with that, stay tuned, and that will be coming out soon. We'll be looking for participants. And in terms of applications in the psychedelic area, we're really interested in the utility of this as a mechanism for group therapy, and how it can be used across the entire preparation, integration, and follow-up. And also applications to other domains where psychedelics are being used, like pain and depression. So with that, I'll close. And I just want to say we're building out our node distribution. And I'm doing that in collaboration with a company in California called Anuma, who's building this out into a platform that works reliably and is, totally rock solid and stuff like that. And if you're interested in being a node, I'm really interested in that. So get in touch. And we have a retreat center. We're building a VR lab in the mountains of northern Portugal at a retreat center called Dalijo Retreat Center, where I have a retreat center up 500 meters up a mountain with a gigabyte per second internet connection, like the fastest internet connection ever. So we have like mission control in the Portuguese mountains, and it's really beautiful up there. So if people are interested, that's the view from my house, where I have mission control in the mountains. So yeah, if you're interested, get in touch, and thank you.
Are you okay to take the
Yeah.
Do I need to be on here to be heard from the... Okay. Right. We would like to take one question from the online audience first, if there is one. Rubina? Could you come to the front and read it here, please? It's okay.
Okay. So Valerie is asking, are there long-term effects of the mystical experience? So maybe openness or something else?
So yeah, do I have to talk in here or just talk here? Okay, yeah, so anecdotally, there are. We've done a lot of qualitative follow-up with probably about 40 of the people that have participated. And we know that qualitatively, it leaves a very distinct residue in people's minds based on things that they've written. What we haven't done yet is the longer term sort of very rigorous quantitative follow-ups. And that's something we're going to do in the next tranche of studies. So yeah, we should have more data on that soon.
If you could just ask your question and I then read it out. You had one, didn't you?
I know you got more data on the confirmation of psychedelics, but do you have any anecdotal data on whether you think there will be synergistic effects and going beyond microdosing, for example?
Yeah. Can you just read it out?
I can repeat it. Yeah, I can repeat the question. Right. So the question was, where one of the things we are looking at with Robin is we're looking at whether there's we're looking at the combination of this Isness VR environment with psychedelics, and the question is, are there synergistic effects between psychedelics and virtual reality? And possibly with microdosing, yeah. So I think one of the ideas that Robin and I are exploring, that maybe you know, is we're getting these very high results on the same psychometrics that are used in psychedelics, and it poses all kinds of interesting questions, like why are we getting these results from a 1 hour session with no preparation, right? It's like, if you look at the cost of this compared to psychedelic psychotherapy, we're getting results that are statistically indistinguishable, but for so much cheaper. And one of the questions we've been asking is, well, if we know that there's a lot of therapeutic benefit from high doses of psychedelics, maybe if we had the VR in combination with very low doses of psychedelics, that would afford an advantage that was comparable to the high doses, but without the risks associated with very, very high doses. And so that is something that we are looking at right now. We've done a few preliminary experiments on the combination. And if you're interested in that, I would be happy to tell you about the phenomenology of that experience in detail over coffee.
Thank you very much.